Good morning, everybody. I love talking to people from the East Coast because I never get made fun of my Newfoundland accent. So if I speak too fast, I know that you'll all understand me, and I don't have any worries that you'll keep up. So thank you all for inviting me here today to talk about a very important topic of domestic violence in the workplace. And thank you, Janet, for extending that invitation. And just so you know, Janet, I was here till 10:30, so I'm not in your bad books either. There's the clicker. Okay, so this presentation is a combination of a couple of different presentations. One is the study that the Canadian Labour Congress did with Western University, and then I take you into a little bit of our trainers. So throughout this presentation, I'll ask if there's any questions or feedback, and then at the end, we're going to do a little bit of roundtable work, and it's a rather large group, so I'm going to ask you to work in your tables and then come to the microphones with your answers. Not all of you, because we'd be here until tomorrow. So we'll work through that, okay? All right. Can we put up the presentation there, Paul, when you're ready, please? Okay, so here's what the agenda for this 90-minute presentation looks like. Domestic violence at work in the survey and the follow-up, representing your members, member education and awareness, collective bargaining, and political action. What I hope that you'll get out of this presentation is examining domestic violence as a workplace issue, understanding the union's role in addressing domestic violence at work, examine sample collective agreement language on domestic violence and brainstorm strategies for building local support, discover opportunities to receive further training and build awareness, discuss strategies for lobby and legislation on domestic violence and other violence at work issues. So some of the conversation that we'll be talking about today may potentially be triggering for some people. And feel free to contact one of the members of the Education Committee if you're having some problems. This is the Transition House number if you need it. There's also a mental health crisis line number that Paul will cue or I will cue. No, Paul, do you have that slide? Where's Paul? No? Okay. So you can take it down. I have it here. It's 1-888-429-8167, and that's the mental health crisis line in case anybody needs it during or after this presentation. Okay, so why we are here. In almost every case of domestic homicide, we found that people around the victim knew what was going on, but didn't know what to do about it. This observation comes from the Ontario's Domestic Violence Death Review Committee, which operates under the auspice of the Coroner's Office. This committee reviews every death that happens in Ontario as a result of domestic violence. People around the victim includes neighbors, friends, family members, as well as co-workers. Most of the information that we'll talk about today comes from Ontario. But I understand that here in the Atlantic provinces, we all are working towards legislative change for domestic violence. So why we're here. Workplaces are very unprepared to respond to domestic violence, and workers have been harmed, harassed, and killed at work. And I understand that recently in Nova Scotia, you've had some incidents with nurses and homicides, so I know it's probably a little fresh for some of you here, and that's why it's very important to talk about this and prepare ourselves for workplace issues. Women with a history of domestic violence have a more disrupted work history, are consequently on lower personal incomes, have had to change jobs more often, are employed at higher levels in casual or part-time work than women with no experience of violence. So domestic violence really impacts the workplace and the victims, because it is one of the safe places that you can feel. So when your work is impacted, it's very detrimental for women. So a way out, employment is a key pathway for women in leaving a violent relationship. We need that financial security in order to leave a relationship. Financial security can allow them to escape becoming trapped and isolated in abusive relationships, maintain their home and their standard of living. And also, if you have financial security, you can feel confident in leaving that situation and know that you can survive. So as you'll see in this presentation, domestic violence doesn't just happen at home. It follows people to work. And when the violence enters the workplace, everyone is at risk. Ontario was the first jurisdiction in the world to include domestic violence under occupational health and safety legislation and to make employers responsible for protecting workers. Canada's labour movement is working to see other jurisdictions pass similar legislation. But in the meantime, we can all work to apply this principle in our workplaces. And again, I mentioned in the Atlantic provinces, we are working towards domestic violence leave. We would hope that it would be paid leave, and I understand New Brunswick has passed unpaid leave. Newfoundland Labrador is working on it. Nova Scotia, I believe, is working on it as well, or you have passed unpaid leave, one of the two. I can't remember. This is the definition that was used in the National Survey of Workers, which the CLC co-sponsored with Western University. So I'll give you a second to read what we define as domestic violence. And this is the definition taken from Ontario's Occupational Health and Safety Council. Notice the definition describes a pattern of behavior used by one person to gain power and control over the intimate partner. You will find similar definitions being used by the provincial and federal governments. There has been many years of research leading to this definition. Part of this presentation is to share with you the initial findings of the Pan-Canadian Survey on Domestic Violence and in the Workplace, and talk about how unions in Canada are following up. I'm very proud of this project because this is the first time this issue has ever been studied in Canada. Indeed, it's probably the first major nationwide survey on any issue relating to violence against women since 1993. I want to begin by reading some of the words of the workers who responded to this survey. As I mentioned before, depending on your personal experiences, you may find the content of today's presentation difficult and even triggering at times. Please do what you need to take care of yourselves and your fellow nurses. He pretended to be security and he dragged me out of work. Dealing with my ex-husband left me feeling anxious, tired, due to lack of sleep. It affected the pleasure my work usually gives me. People were sympathetic and horrified, but also very, very uncomfortable. Confiding in coworkers helped alleviate the stress of being attacked, going to the car, the unending phone calls over and over and over, and the extreme fatigue both physically and mentally. I was tired and distracted, yet work was a place where I felt safe. We bring to work everything that happens at home. We can't compartmentalize or mentally separate these difficult aspects of our lives. While it might not technically be the responsibility of the employer or the union to provide shelter or assistance for employees being victimized by abusers at home, the workplace is the logical place to provide help, support, and resources for victims of violence. I think creating the ability in the union and in any work environment for discussions around these issues is more important than people realize. This survey ran for 6 months. It was conducted online in English and in French. It was anonymous, voluntary, and took between 10 to 30 minutes depending on your personal situation. All Canadian workers over the age of 15 were eligible to participate, whether or not they had experienced or witnessed domestic violence. We promoted it using posters and bookmarks in emails, on websites, in newsletters, and by word of mouth. It was a real multi-union collaboration, and I think that everyone got on board because they could see that this was an important issue, that having good information was going to make a difference for our members. So we had 8,429 workers respond to this survey. The vast majority were women, and while we did have responses from across the country, almost half were from Ontario. However, the numbers in general were so strong that the survey results will provide an excellent snapshot and some good data that is consistent with other studies. One interesting observation, as you can see, was most of the respondents were employed in stable, unionized jobs. This confirms that violence can happen to people from all walks of life. It does make me wonder whether the impacts are felt differently by people in precarious work. Would more of them have lost their jobs? Are they more likely to disclose or less likely to disclose? This may be a question for further research that the Canadian Labour Congress will participate in doing. So here is what we've learned. Over a third of the workers who responded had experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. Women, trans, and Aboriginal workers, workers with disabilities, and the LGBTQ two-spirited workers had higher rates than most. All of this is consistent with other national surveys from other countries. Here, you see the rates for women, men, and trans workers. For those who report that they are currently experiencing domestic violence and those who have experienced domestic violence in their lifetimes. You will see that the rates for the trans people are very, very high. And you see that overall, almost 7% are currently experiencing violence. We also asked people about their co-workers. Over a third believe that they work with someone who is experiencing or has experienced domestic violence. And almost 12% believe that at least one co-worker is being abusive or has abused a partner. Here we see that the impact of domestic violence on the workplace. 38% of those who have experienced domestic violence reported that it affected their ability to get to work. Over half said the violence occurred at or near their workplace. 82% found that domestic violence had a negative effect on their work or their work performance. And over a third reported that co-workers were affected as well. Almost 9% lost a job because of domestic violence. I found these stats very alarming as they are quite high, and it's why unions really need to work to lobby for legislative changes, because as you all know, unions do set the bar for workers who aren't unionized. So the more benefits that we get and the more push we do on legislative changes, the more it will impact everybody. Here is some more detail about the violence that is occurring at or near the workplace. We see high rates of abusive phone calls or text messages. 20% report stalking, which researchers note is very high risk behavior. 18% said the abuser physically came to the workplace. 15% received abusive text messages, and almost the same number said their abuser contacted coworkers or the employer. Which again, those are quite high, and it does impact work, and it affects everybody at work. We also asked whether the workers who experienced domestic violence discussed it with someone at work. Almost 40% said that they did, which means that unfortunately 60% didn't. Most told a coworker, Almost half reported it to a supervisor or a manager. Some had access to a designated domestic violence person. Perhaps the most depressing number for me was that only 12.5% talked to their union. And this is where we know we clearly need work to do here. Here is some slightly better news. About the same number of respondents received information about domestic violence from their union and their employer, but the numbers are still fairly low, around 28%. Only about 10% think that employers are aware when domestic violence is affecting their workplace. And a majority of those think employers act positively. Slightly more people think union officials are aware when domestic violence is affecting their members. That's not so good. But almost 90% believe that unions acted positively. We also asked the workers who responded what they believed about domestic violence in the workplace. Almost all of them think that domestic violence impacts the work life of workers. And about 75% think that workplace supports such as paid leave and safety policies can reduce this impact. So to summarize the study's findings, many workers have experienced domestic violence or know of co-workers who have. Domestic violence has significant impacts on the workplace. Workplace responses are mixed, but when the place are seen as generally positive, and people believe that supports like paid leave and domestic violence policies can help. I'm just going to stop there for a second. Does anybody have any questions or comments on anything we've talked about so far? Okay. So the next steps. We'll also be working on adding to the research on this issue. Together with the researchers at Western, we have established an international network of researchers and unions in the hopes that similar surveys can be conducted elsewhere in order to add to the international comparators and to collect a broad range of promising practices and legislative solutions. Another Canadian researcher has started looking at perpetrators of violence and how their behavior affects their working life and their co-workers. There may be follow-up studies, or we may want to look at doing more research in a specific region or with specific kinds of workers. There is a lot we can do to build on the success of this work. And I was having a conversation at breakfast this morning, and unfortunately in Newfoundland and Labrador, our statistics of domestic violence is actually increasing, and it's not decreasing as we would have hoped. So we know we have a lot of work to do in our province. So now that we have this research, and we know the extent of the problem, what are we going to do? This survey is the start of a conversation, one that we need to have within our movement, with employers and with governments. We think the results can be used in many ways to advocate for changes to occupational health and safety and human rights legislation and employment standards, for domestic violence protections and entitlement, especially flexible working hours and paid domestic violence leave. We can also look to collective bargaining for some of those entitlements, like our colleagues in Australia, who have negotiated domestic violence clauses and have extended these protections to almost 2 million workers. We can look to some initiative peer support programs, like the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, Social Stewards. These are union activists specially trained to member access resources and support when they face situations like domestic violence. And there needs to be education throughout workplaces about domestic violence, as well as access to specific tools, supports, and safety pathways for victims and for perpetrators. So our follow-up is focused on 3 key areas: collective bargaining, member education and public awareness, and improving legislation. There are a few other unions that do have other stewards, or they're called women advocates, who are specifically trained in domestic violence issues so that they can help, and they're different than like labor relations stewards. So that is actually starting to grow within the labor movement. So that's a very positive step for us. To build a collective bargaining agenda, we first have to evaluate what affiliates are already doing. So once we released the survey results, the CLC surveyed affiliates looking for promising practices. And at that time, the only collective agreement language that specifically grants paid leave for domestic violence victims was negotiated by the Yukon Teachers Association. Of course, we'd be happy to hear of any other examples that you have. This is a good starting place. A Canadian precedent will be useful to negotiators who plan to introduce language. Indeed, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation has already negotiated this language into their agreement for support staff at Brooke University, as a number of United Steelworkers locals and many unions have tabled it as a bargaining demand. Our bargaining agenda is driven by 7 key principles for negotiating domestic violence clauses. They have been adapted from principles developed by Australian unions. They were adopted by our Canadian Council of Affiliated Unions. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Canadian Council is, it's the national leadership of the labor movement. So not long after our survey was completed, the Canadian Council adopted these 7 key principles. You can see that the principles include certain priorities like paid leave, workplace safety planning, referral to supports, and the importance of assuring confidentiality. Because that is one of the key things that we hear, is that confidentiality mightn't be kept, and it's an uncomfortable situation to talk about, and it's the mind your own business perception that we have. But conversations like the one we're having here today will open the doors, and it'll become more and more acceptable, just like it's more and more acceptable to talk about mental illness in the workplace now. So the more we talk about it, the more comfortable people will get with it. The principles offer guidelines for negotiators and unions looking to make gains at the bargaining table. We have used them to develop model language, which is available on the CLC's Domestic Violence at Work online resource center. It's really good tools for information for you to use. The online resource center launched in November of 2016, and it includes general information about domestic violence, information for stewards, and a section for leaders and negotiators. It will be an evolving resource as we develop new tools, and information will keep adding to it. We hope it will be helpful for co-workers, union representatives, and our movement as a whole. And this presentation is about 2 years old now, and we continue to strive for domestic violence in the workplace gains. We have a Done Waiting campaign that domestic violence is a huge part of, so if you go to the Canadian Labour Congress website, you'll see a whole lot of information there. Another promising practice that I mentioned earlier was the Postal Workers program called Social Stewards. And the United Way also works with unions to coordinate the labor community advocates or union counselors. And Unifor has a program called Women's Advocates. The Women's Advocates or Social Stewards are negotiated with employers. They receive 40 hours of training, paid for by the employer, but run by the union. And then yearly refresher courses are offered as well. Many women may not feel comfortable approaching their steward, business agent, health and safety representative, or their executive members, but if they know that there's someone in the workplace who you can talk to, they may be more likely to seek assistance. Many of Unifor's women's advocates testify to the effectiveness of this program, and they can cite specific examples of the difference it has made to the life or safety of their members. They have also said that they often are approached by men for assistance as well. They have developed a model clause for unions who might want to establish a similar program in their workplaces. Perhaps our biggest piece of work is the task of building awareness among union members and training leaders and representatives so that we can recognize and respond to domestic violence in our workplaces. This is the range of educational programs we are currently delivering and also make available for use, tailoring by affiliates. So this is one of the presentation that I'm giving to you now is one of the programs that we are tailoring. There is a base level workshop presentation. It's a 1-hour primer aimed at every worker. The goal of this workshop is to raise general awareness of domestic violence and its workplace impacts. We have a training for what we call first responders. It's a 2-day workshop or a module that would be offered as advanced training for stewards, health and safety representatives, women's advocates, and other frontline representatives. It would give union representatives what they need to help recognize and respond to domestic violence at work. And it would also equip them to deliver the 1-hour presentation. The Facilitator Training, most recently we have started working with smaller groups and providing intensive training so that they can deliver the first responder course or train within your own affiliate. This will help us build capacity in the movement to carry this work forward. Trainers will need advanced facilitation skills as well as some experience or knowledge in women issues or workplace violence. When identifying triggers, we also need to keep in mind the course material may be triggering and trainers may need to support participants who may find the material difficult. So we'll be looking for the right people to train and we'll be approaching your leadership to identify those trainers. We're also putting together a 1-day training or an online training for leader and negotiators on why this is a union issue, the legal obligations of unions and employers, and how to address it with employers in bargaining, and also examples of workplace supports and collective agreement language. There are a number of other potential ideas that need to be discussed further. Do we want training aimed specifically for men in unions, like the bystander intervention training? Do we want joint management union training? We'd love your feedback as we continue to develop these programs. We're developing this education program with our colleagues at Western who already have extensive training materials, including some very effective videos. And what we've learned in piloting some of this is that it is challenging material. And so we are taking time to do it right so that we can deliver to unions in the way that is most effective, sensitive, and responsible. We also plan to develop some basic materials, whether they are posters, magnets, door hangers, or other pieces, to build awareness of domestic violence as a workplace issue. And those are actually on the CLC website. That's the Done Waiting campaign that I referenced a little while ago. Our first piece is a poster and a brochure with some general information about why domestic violence is a union issue. Our poster and brochure will promote our online resource center that have resources for stewards, union leaders, and negotiators. And you can visit the site at domesticviolenceatwork.ca. Our legislative agenda is more of a long-term project, as each jurisdiction is different. We have encouraged provincial and territorial federations of labor and their affiliates to approach their government and to share the survey results. Looking at their health and safety legislation to see if more can be done to hold employers responsible for safety at work, and to ensure workers experience domestic violence are not penalized if they do miss work. Because it is important to us that what we do can work for all workers, including those not protected by a collective agreement. We have been doing the same at the federal level with our labor minister and others. Provincial and territorial governments can follow Ontario's lead by amending the occupational health and safety legislation to place positive obligations on employers to protect workers from domestic violence, and also consider amendments to employment standards that give the right to request flexible working arrangements and entitlement to paid domestic violence leave. Ontario so far is the only jurisdiction with this kind of legislation in place. This study was done, or released, in 2016, so I do know there has been legislative changes right now to occupational health and safety acts and labor standards across the country, and if they haven't been already made, unions are working very hard with their governments to make this a reality. But Manitoba did up the game by passing legislation to amend the Employment Standards Act by adding 5 days of paid domestic leave, as well as some unpaid leave. The legislation passed in March, making Manitoba the first jurisdiction to offer paid leave to all their workers. Ontario is now considering a private member's bill that would give victims of domestic violence and sexual violence up to 10 days paid leave. And the federal government is looking at similar protections for workers in federally regulated sectors. Governments can also commit to examining community-based supports and services and listen to the service providers of anti-violence organizations about the kinds of investments needed by both victims and perpetrators. So what can you do? Here are just a few ideas. Talk it up with your members, with your leadership, and with your employers. Tell people about what you've learned and why it's important for all of us to take on this issue. Put it at your bargaining table. You might find it easy to make the case for paid leave for employees. Empower your representatives. Take advantage of the training opportunities when they are offered, and let us know what you need. Support your members. Be there for them. Know where you can turn to in your community for support if you find a member is experiencing domestic violence, and let them know that you're there to help them make their work a safe place. So before I go on, I'm going to stop and ask if there's any questions, because that is the end of the study from Western, the results. Okay, can you go to a mic, sister, so I can hear you? Thank you.
So when you're talking about the paid leave that's being proposed in Ontario and the one that's been approved in Manitoba, do you know if those days are annual or if that is a lifetime of 5 days off?
I'm not sure. I believe it's a year-to-year thing. I don't think it's the span of your lifetime. And my understanding is that it's not like a full day of paid leave. So for example, if you needed a half a day to go to the bank to set up a new banking system, or if you needed a few hours to go to a lawyer, or so I think it's a flexible 5 days paid leave, and that's really what we should be striving for, is not like a blanket full day, because you might only need an hour. And as you know, people feel very safe at work, because that's where they're supposed to be to. So if their abuser is looking for them, they know they're at work. So they can't just take a day off here and there to do that. So at least if it's just an hour, they can safely leave work, go what they need to do, and then come back to work. Okay? Yes?
When we're talking about domestic violence, generally talked about in the context of a life partner, but a lot of domestic violence situations have involved a parent, a sibling, or a child. How does the legislation and the research and the support mechanisms apply to those circumstances?
I can find out for you and let your education people know, but my understanding is that it's just for intimate partners. The domestic violence leave just covers that. I know that there is abuse by parents, by children, by seniors, and those types of abusive, but I believe this is domestic violence intimate partner leave. Yeah. But that's also something we should be working on as well. Anybody else? Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to make a comment.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out to the car because I have bills there that are asked to know.
Okay.
And it does clarify a little bit to that question.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Anyone else?
I have a question about your study.
Yep.
Obviously, I didn't see it. Obviously, though, when you did do it, it included gender identification. Male, female, homosexual, because obviously you had those up. I might suggest the next time that there's no identifiers. Domestic violence is domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
So we know males have a difficult time even doing a survey in order to identify that they are a victim. You might end up getting a clearer look at the numbers if you do not put any kind of identifiers on it. Just, are you a victim?
Okay. That's really good feedback, and I will take that to, because we will be doing follow-up work on this, and I think the purpose of it was to get some ground stats first, and then we could build on that and see where our areas that we definitely need to work on. So I will take that feedback back to our department. Thank you.
Just
Yes.
in comment to this, I would say that I would offer a cautionary note regarding that, because I think that there's an assumption, a heteronormative assumption, when you don't have an identifier. So that if you don't have an identifier, then there's an assumption that it's straight white folks. So I think there is value in having those
Right.
those identifiers.
And you'll see in the next part of my presentation that we do deal with same-sex partners, and we do deal with people who might be in a more precarious situation through ethnicity. So you'll see that in some of the follow-up training after we did the survey. Because this is a work in progress, so all of your feedback is greatly appreciated, because, as I said, this is a program that's a very sensitive issue, but it's an issue that we want to do it right. And so it is a work in progress. So that's why we really appreciate feedback and comments from people. And especially people who work in healthcare, because you are our ground level workers, and you have a very hands-on knowledge that some of us mightn't have, basically. Go ahead.
Just with that, domestic violence is often identified as somebody that's living in a household. There is a large number of people that are out of a relationship, now in another relationship, and the violence is coming from a past partner. So I don't know how the legislation works around that, but it's still happening.
Yeah, I believe it's and I had it in an earlier slide that it does deal with friends, family, neighbors. So I think, to your point, that would be included as well, because it is intimate partner, and that's where it comes from, whether or not they're still intimate or not. So yes, I believe the legislation does address it that way. Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay. In Bill 73, which was introduced in March, and
Is this a Nova Scotia bill?
this
Sorry.
is a Nova Scotia bill.
Thank you.
Yes. This bill provides paid leave when an employee or a child of an employee is the victim of domestic, intimate partner, or sexual violence. Now, Bill 107, which was introduced this month, says, delves a little deeper into that. And it says a child of an employee or an individual under 18 years of age who resides with the employee, or an adult who resides with the employee and is related to the employee by blood, marriage, foster care, or adoption. And it goes whether the abuse is physical, sexual, emotional, or psychological. It may include the act of coercion, stalking, harassment, or financial control, or a threat or an attempt to do an act.
Okay.
So that kind of clarifies a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah, because I'm not familiar with the Nova Scotia legislation, just what I may have read in a news article here and there. So thank you for your clarification. Anybody else? Okay. So now we're going to give you a taste of the content that we're working on for representatives within your unions. It's important to understand that our goal here is not to save people who are experiencing violence. We need to get them to, it's not our goal for them to save people who are experiencing violence or get them to leave their partner. Our goal is to interrupt the isolation that fuels domestic violence, to approach our members from a place of caring and concern, to make sure they are safe at work and also that we're all safe at work, and to keep victims employed. The overall framework for our approach is the 3 R's: recognize, respond, and refer. And there is a 4th R, which is report, which we will discuss as well in the training. So some workplace warning signs: bruising that cannot be explained, missing work, being sick or late more often, sad, lonely, withdrawn, and afraid, trouble concentrating on a task, receiving upsetting phone calls or text messages, using alcohol or drugs to cope, requesting accommodations such as leaving early and not wanting to leave work. This is not an exhaustive list, and note that domestic violence often shows up in the workplace as performance issues. A warning sign does not automatically mean abuse. A warning sign should just raise a flag that deserves your attention. The Domestic Violence Death Review Committee has identified 39 risk factors that indicate the potential of lethality. While warning signs are a red flag that should raise questions, these high-risk factors, especially when they occur in combination, mean that you need to act. At the very least, you need to tell what you know to the people who are responsible for safety, possibly calling the police. Safety for everyone is a priority. In our training, we spend a lot of time becoming familiar with the warning signs and risk factors, as well as the dynamics of domestic violence at work. This is not to have people go running off and diagnosing domestic violence victims, but rather to help them understand what they need to pay attention to and when to consider acting on one's inner voice of concern. So we're going to watch a video, and I want you to notice the warning signs and the risk factors. We'll get that started in 1 second with sound.
Changes, the voice doesn't. Same guy.
Thank you.
Kitchen. She's not here. Maybe she's still in the washroom. Samir? Okay, Samir, I'll tell her you called. Samir, Rupinder, Naveen. The name changes, the voice doesn't. Same guy. Between him and her kids calling all the time, it's a wonder she gets anything done. Who called again? Answer the phone, Mila. Please answer the phone.
Kitchen.
I was here. I was here. I was preparing the tables for... What?
I'm not.
Okay, so what kind of warning signs or risk factors did you notice? And I might just ask you to call it out from your chair, or if you can get to a microphone, that would be okay as well. So out of the video there, what kind of risk factors or warning signs did you see from Neela? Sorry? Hesitation for going to take the phone call? Phone calls at work, yeah. Like inconsistent phone calls according to her co-workers' comments. Sorry? Having to justify where she was at work, so it was obviously an uncomfortable conversation there she was having with her partner. Someone over here said something. She was apprehensive. She was obviously nervous going to the phone and not wanting to take the phone call, right? Sorry? Right, so constant calls from obviously the same caller, so it's that repetitive texting, phoning, bothering at work, right? Wondering where you are, justifying that you're there. Anything else? She was isolated, right? You could tell that her coworkers were impacted by the constant phone calls, and they were getting annoyed and irritated with that as well, so she was feeling isolated. No support? Did someone say that? Yeah, okay, yeah. Go ahead. Was that you? Said no support? Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she didn't have the support from her coworkers that, they actually forced her to take the phone call, right? Okay. And she was, yeah. Go ahead. Right. So the comment was that one of her coworkers appeared to have some concerns, like you could tell that, but didn't really know what to do with it, right? So it's a very good point. And that's, again, one of the good things about doing training like this is that it will help us, again, make that conversation more comfortable to have and hopefully know how to respond to those situations. Do you think that because Neela was a racialized woman, do you think that might have impacted the conversation? Right? Because we're still dealing with that in the workplace, right? So it definitely could have, depending on how her co-workers would respond to her. Okay, good. I'm going to show you another video. And we'll do the same thing. It's a different video. I think I have to cue it. Okay.
I'll find out. Hold on one sec.
Where's Melanie?
I think she's in a meeting.
But it's her lunch hour.
They often run over.
Where's the meeting?
You are?
Leslie, I'm her partner.
Nice to meet you. I'm not sure which room they're in.
Well, can you check? I wanted to surprise her and take her to lunch, but suddenly she's disappeared. Does she often take lunch meetings?
Sometimes.
Where is she going to be tomorrow? Can you scroll down?
Excuse me?
Maybe I'll just take a look myself, see if I can find her.
I'd prefer if you didn't. I'll tell her you were here.
You do that.
Now, you as healthcare workers never get that, right? So, Melanie's clerk was a little bit more prepared or assertive or confident in how to deal with the situation. So what were some things that you noticed the difference in that video from Melanie's video, from Neela's video? The perpetrator was very upfront and actually showed up at work, right? Sorry? She was bolder. Right. The coworker seemed that she may have been aware of the situation and definitely tried to protect her confidentiality, whether she was aware of the situation or not, right? She definitely tried to protect that piece of it. Anything else? The partner was controlling, yeah.
Partners seem to try to be nice.
The
partner tries to come across as nice.
Okay.
Well, mean and
Maybe to try to get, so may have been a little manipulating, the partner may have been a little manipulating to try to gain information on her partner. Okay. Yeah. The receptionist did a very good job, even if she was aware of whatever was going on. She did kind of handle the situation very well to say, back up, lady, right? Yeah.
if they were on good terms, she should have known the partner that, yes, she's sometimes over, like, your meetings go over, and then she questions you, does she normally have, like, lunch meetings or at this time?
Yeah. I'm going to call her a clerk. The clerk definitely knew something was up when the perpetrator came in and questioned, where she was. Do her meetings run late? It kind of, the red flags, the little sixth sense that you get, that we as you as healthcare workers. I used to work in a hospital before I came to Congress. I was about to say we as healthcare workers. Get that little bit of a sixth sense dealing with people, right? Do you think that because it was a same-sex partner relationship, do you think that that was handled appropriately? Right? Because in the stats that I had showed you earlier, the LGBTQ two-spirited community actually has a higher risk of same-sex domestic violence abuse. So it can definitely happen. So that's a good factor to keep into the back of your head as well. Okay. So the conversation. The key to addressing domestic violence at work is interrupting the isolation that fuels the domestic violence. The isolation of the person experiencing it, but also our own isolation as someone who sees something but doesn't know quite what to do about it. And that's a situation we're really going to find ourselves in a lot because we don't really know how to handle it. We don't want to be interfering in someone's personal life, right? But we do need to start kind of having those conversations and being comfortable with those conversations if you do kind of get that red flag that something isn't right about this situation. Our training uses a technique called See It, Name It, Check It to help to empower union reps to have a caring conversation with someone that they think might be experiencing domestic violence. A see it, name it, check it conversation with her might sound something like this. I'm concerned about you. You've been wearing sunglasses all week, and you are working late every day. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do to help? See it, name it, check it to reduce isolation and increase safety. It takes courage to see it, name it, check it. Most people feel uncomfortable seeing signs of abuse, and there's always pressure to mind your own business. We have to overcome this pressure because safety is everyone's responsibility. Okay, so let's see what Melanie's colleague might do to approach her about her partner's visit.
Leslie was here.
Did she leave?
I think so, yeah.
I should call her. She was texting me during the meeting.
Can we talk for a minute? She was really pushy, demanding to know where you were. She checked your schedule. It was awkward. She keeps really close tabs on you, huh?
She worries about me.
I'm worried about you. The union sent this around. Might be worth having a look. If you ever want to talk or whatever, you know where to find me.
Thanks, Sona.
Any feedback or comments from that video? So the clerk, she saw it. She recognized the risk factors that she, saw the Melanie's partner becoming aggressive, becoming intrusive, showing up at work, accusing her of not being available, meetings potentially running late, checking her whereabouts. So the clerk saw it, right? She went to Melanie and named her concerns, but not in an accusatory manner. Just, I'm coming from a place of concern for you. This is kind of what I saw. And then she checked it. She just had some material there with some information on it. This is here for you if you need it. I'm here for you if you need me. And, please don't hesitate to kind of contact me or seek some assistance for somebody. So the see it, name it, check it works very well in broaching that uncomfortable conversation that you might have to have with someone who you suspect is a victim of domestic violence. So is that kind of okay with how that conversation, should play out? The see it, name it, check it? Okay. Okay, I have another video there. And this is a woman's advocate, so a trained union rep to how they would go about this.
I am going to need all the caffeine I can get to make it through this shift.
This is my third cup. Don't think it's working.
Did you see Brian?
Where was he?
Out in the parking lot about an hour ago.
Oh, yeah, I just spoke to him on the phone. He just worries so much when I work late.
It's not just when you're working late, though. If he's not lurking around outside, he's calling the desk, wanting to know where you are, who you're working with. Is everything okay?
It's just Brian being Brian.
Why didn't you go on your holidays?
Oh, the timing just wasn't right. Well, right now we really need the money more, Brian's still out of work and he's thinking about retraining. So it probably makes sense for me to get in as many hours as possible to pay for that.
Are you sure you're okay, Gail? Because you know you can talk to me. I have a ton of support material on my desk, and if you want to talk about it together and figure something out, we can do that. Sound good? Come see me when we finish our coffee, okay?
So that's a trained workers advocate in how to deal with those situations, but it's still the same principle: the see it, the name it, the check it. So she saw the partner in the parking lot, brought it forward, and if you think back to the risk factors that I talked about earlier, it's one of them is the partner is depressed or withdrawn, the abusive partner I'm referencing there now. And, it's that isolation at work. It's all those risk factors that the woman's advocate saw. So she saw it, she had the conversation with her worker, and again, just offered her support, and it was a little bit more of a direct conversation than the clerk had with Melanie, but same type of principle. Okay. Any comments or feedback from that video?
She kind of seemed like she was like almost pushing her into it a little, into doing it, because she might not feel comfortable to do it. She kind of said, "Come see me."
The woman's advocate? Okay. So for those of you who couldn't hear, the comment was that the woman's advocate seemed to be a little bit more assertive in her approach, and it might have been because of the training or the confidence that she might have felt, and then, but kind of backed up a little bit and said, you know, you come see me if you need my help, but it's definitely here, and this is what I know. Is that kind of a fair statement? Okay. Okay.
Kept that coffee break separate to make sure that the woman would come voluntarily to see her.
Okay. So the comment that was made was that you appreciated the setting of the coffee break, so probably a more comfortable setting, approached the person, but then gave the person the opportunity to come to them later if they so choose. Because again, our purpose in this is to direct them to the help that they need, right? Not to become counselors or separation counselors or whatever. It's to try to get them the help that they need to handle the domestic violence situation. Right? Okay, great, thanks. Anything else? Okay. So the next slide talks about the offenders in the workplace. So the training that we do doesn't just look at victims of domestic violence. We also know that we work with offenders and they're similarly impacted. This research that was conducted in Vermont, over 300 offenders charged with domestic violence contributed to this data pool. And the data provides insight into the impact of offender behavior in the workplace. So as you can see, 29% of offenders used workplace resources to contact or harass the victim. 65% of co-workers were aware of the domestic abuse perpetrated by their co-worker. And 40% of supervisors were aware that employees were contacting their partner in this way while at work. And this is where we need everybody's help in this, is that if we don't help the perpetrators as well to stop the behavior that they're doing, this cycle of domestic violence will never end. So we need to help victims and perpetrators in this. Common reasons why respondents' partners took time off work were to address emotional or mental issues, address physical issues, attend court or legal meetings, and recover post-incident. So this again talks about the offenders in the workplace. I'll give you a second to read that slide. Oh, do you need a second? Sorry. I talk quick, I read quick. Good? Okay. So this next clip is an offender video in the workplace and how the coworker deals with it.
That was messed up, man. Somebody could have gotten hurt.
Yeah, but no one did.
This time? How could you forget to tie off? It's the first thing you're supposed to do. You know that. What, too busy texting? You've been on the phone every time I seen you all week. Who was that you were screaming at? On the phone, this morning.
She just doesn't listen to reason. I have to fight with her every time.
I'm not sure what you're dealing with, but when you're working, you gotta keep your shit together. Or you're a danger not just to yourself, but to everyone here.
So what are you gonna do, report me?
It's a health and safety issue. They have to know what happened so it won't happen again.
You would just listen to me and do what I told her to do.
Okay. Comments, feedback on that video? You can definitely see how a perpetrator would impact a workplace, right? This is a construction site, and how the safety piece of that would be impacting everybody. Same thing in a nursing setting, right? Anybody who's distracted at work can be a very dangerous situation. So again, it needs to be addressed as well from that point of view, because it is very dangerous to have that behavior at work as well. Plus, it's an uncomfortable situation because there's obviously something happening there with that offender, and the supervisor is trying to deal with it as best he can. So that's a piece of it that we have to be aware of as well. Yeah. So the comment was, if they act like that in public, what are they doing behind closed doors? So that's a very good point as well. Again, it's that spotty sense that we talk about, right? That you know something's not right. And I guess that's where the name it piece of it comes into it, right? Okay, all right. So this framework can be applied to any potential domestic violence situation. Recognizing the specific warning signs or risk factors, respond initially with a see it, name it, check it conversation, to ask the questions and to give opportunity for a disclosure. And that's what that supervisor did, right? I'm not really sure what's going on, but you need to get your shit together, as he said, and we need to deal with this. If someone discloses abuse, every precaution reasonable will include a risk assessment, safety planning, and risk management. Decisions will need to be made about who else needs to be involved, both within the organization and with external experts. And in the training, the first responders training, we go a little bit more in depth of what to do when an abusive partner shows up at work, or another situation is when you're at work and the abuser leaves to go to another work site, and how we handle that. We won't talk about that today, but that is in the training that the more in-depth training. There are experts in most communities that can help with safety planning and risk assessment. Unless there is an exercise, attempt, or threat of physical violence, there is no obligation to report. But as we have discussed, you want to create an environment of open communication where people feel supported to talk to about their concerns. So again, keep the see it, name it, check it in your vocabulary. So there is a video here on building our expertise, and we went through this morning, myself and Paul, and unfortunately you can only hear it, you can't see the video. So what the video actually talks about is how you use your collective agreement to help a person who is experiencing domestic violence, and how important it is to have policies and practices and legislation. Because in the very first video we showed, the two ladies prepping the salads and the phone call, you can see how that would impact her work performance and how her coworkers would become irritated with the constant interruptions and the aggravation of that piece of it. So we as union activists have to make sure that we use our collective agreements to help these people not lose their jobs, and to make sure that we have language in there that they can use, and not just sick leave, because that's not, or annual leave, because that's not what those two provisions are for. This is a separate leave and separate language that we need to get into our collective agreement so that we can help these people actually keep their jobs, because the financial security that victims need is so crucial and so important that we really need to do everything we can to learn how to use our collective agreement to help these victims, and to help our perpetrators as well, to get them to the proper help that they need. Okay, so sorry that this video isn't available, but that was the quick version. Okay, so we're going to try to work in a little bit of group work here, and I want you to work in your tables. So now we're going to talk about how can your union promote a more welcoming environment so that members feel that they can turn to their union for support. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to discuss this as groups in your tables, and then I'm going to ask a couple of people to come forward at the mic with what their groups have discussed. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to talk about this slide, and let's see what we come up with. I need Janet's whistle. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop. And I'm going to ask if anyone would like to come forward to a microphone so that you can share your results with everyone. Oh, thank you. Mic 2 there, please. Okay, can I ask you to quiet for a second? We got a speaker at a mic. Here you go.
We talked about maybe having posters up just to kind of promote that there is support out there.
Perfect.
The second thing we talked about was education at union meetings, maybe at staff meetings. And I sit on the occupational health and safety. Is that something that we should be kind of putting in a little bit of a limelight on that form, because there's management and other union partners there?
If you're asking me, I think absolutely yes, because as you can see from the videos, it could potentially be a health and safety issue for anybody at work. So your work site does need to be prepared for,
it's just a pathway to bring it to people's minds, right?
Absolutely. It's the awareness piece of it. So perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mike 6. Oh, sorry, I don't know who's first, so I'm going to go. Okay, go ahead.
So we have something down for if there was something in our collective agreement, something in the language.
Yeah.
Also, a safe place to have that private and confidential conversation with someone, not necessarily a break room, but like a safe room. Also, some kind of poster or communication resources that's a visual kind of walk by. You can see it. There's a number you can call. A list of not necessarily supports within your workplace from your employer, but also supports that are in your village or town or city, because sometimes people don't feel confident breaking that. Almost they feel like they're breaking a level of professionalism confiding in their coworkers.
Right.
But if they had 15 minutes in their day to call a local resource with trained, skilled workers there, it just gives them that opportunity, right?
Perfect. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I like the idea of a space. And again, the more we talk about it, the more this conversation will be more appropriate. I'm going to go to speak. I can't see the microphone 5, I think it is. Go ahead.
Our group talked about, of course, first of all, being supportive and trying not to be judgmental if somebody does approach you. As a local union, making it more visible. Like we don't currently have anything that's available on bulletin boards or on our website or anything that there is support for victims of domestic violence. And then also pointing people to the occupational health department at our work site specifically. There is lots of literature and support for people going through.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. All great suggestions. I think Mike 3 was next, I think. Go ahead.
Okay. So at our facility, and I'm sure many across the province probably have an education site that's called iTacit. We thought if we put, some education, some information on that because all the employees have to go on there every year and read. So we thought that might be a good forum for
excellent
getting people. And we have more in our facility because we're long-term care. There's very few licensed staff, but there's tons of unlicensed staff that probably are more risk.
Right. So it's the awareness and protecting not only people in your own bargaining unit, but everybody in your facility. Yeah. Great. Perfect. Thank you. Mike 6.
Yeah. Almost repetitive. Posters, education, Josh, and managers, EAP, bystander training, and a contact person as a violence prevention person.
Perfect. Yeah. Great. All great suggestions. Thank you. And I'll take, 2 more, 3 and 1. Okay, 3, first? I don't know,
Okay,
sorry.
I'll be really quick.
Okay.
They're all excellent suggestions. We talked about just getting the message out there first.
Yep.
That maybe get the message out that the union is supportive of people that need help and in a confidential manner, and just have someone even champion it within the union, and just have that message out there in the hospital intranet and things like that, just first of all, and then other things like, lobbying for an advocate or having somebody that's an advocate, and, education sessions that might start within the union.
Right.
Or if sometimes staff can't get to education and all those issues, but at least to have the message out there would be very important, that they'd have somewhere to go to and talk to occupational
Yep.
health and HR and kind of coordinate with them.
Perfect. Promotion awareness, excellent. Great, thank you. And last two speakers. I'll go one first.
Thank you. As everyone mentioned, we can create more awareness in workplace, and also we discussed about the red flag and signs and symptoms of how someone is in abusive behaviors and who is experiencing that every day. Sometimes people get desensitized to the everyday activity, and they don't even realize they are in abusive behavior. So as a coworker, we can easily find and asking a simple question, are you okay? Is everything okay with your personal life? You don't even go into an intervention. You can just start a normal conversation so that the coworker may know, yes, I have someone in my workplace who can share my feelings, and then we can go from there if they need more support with the union. Yes.
Very good points.
Thank you.
And that's one thing that kind of wasn't highlighted, that, abuse doesn't just start and escalate right from, 0 to 60. It's a very gradual process, so it's a very good point. Thank you. Okay, and speaker on 2.
Hi, I'm Erin Bursey from Cape Breton University. We are thinking that maybe for the students, that it would be beneficial to have maybe an education day before we graduate, so that we know that when we leave school, we know how to deal with such matters as these. I think that we'll know and not have to have education when we leave our school and go on the floors. And if we see it, we'll know how to deal with it right away instead of having to. Thank you.
That's a very, very good point, because the early awareness, the early promotion of these are the types of things you might have to deal with, conversations, will become more comfortable and open dialogue about it. So it's a very good point. Thank you for that. Okay, great. Your next little group work there. How can your union promote a more welcoming environment so members feel that they can turn to their union for support? And with some of this we already talked about, so I'm going to give you another couple of minutes and talk about it in your groups, and then we'll ask some people to report back on what they found. Stop. And I'm going to apologize because I read out the wrong question, but hopefully you looked at the slides and read the right question. So this was the one you were supposed to answer. How would you make the case for your local to send stewards and reps for DV work training? Apologies for that one. Did you all answer the right slide? Perfect. Okay. Speaker on 6.
A workplace that we actually don't go into our building very
Can
often.
I ask folks to just, I can't hear the speaker, sorry. It's old age. Go ahead.
I'm representing a workplace where we actually don't have a building. We have representatives, so with VON Halifax specifically.
Okay.
We were suggesting designating at least one person in the workplace to be trained in DV support, not the union rep. We don't want to add anything more to you. And sending out communication at least once a year. So for us, most of our communication, we don't see posters.
Right.
We don't have a workplace, well, our workplace moves around. Or break room or a safe place to go. So we need a little bit more of the communication by email.
Perfect. Great suggestions. And nice that you worked within what you have to work with. So that's great. Speaker on 3.
Hi, I work for a small long-term care facility. Last year, our Josh committee actually, and because it is intimate and real to us, we do have a large number of unregulated staff that are affected. So last year, our Josh committee, actually, we did a mock disaster on that very thing, and we did a scenario.
Excellent.
Where the domestic partner actually, right, yeah. We actually had a mock where the domestic partner actually drove through the front of the building. And every day, it really.
Wow.
And we think, like, this could happen, right? This
Absolutely.
So it was very effective. So I think bridging that gap between the licensed staff with the Josh committee, I think is a great.
That's very progressive. That's excellent. Great. Thank you. Okay. And I take the last speaker on 5.
I don't think I'm on there. We just had a discussion at the table about if the more you know, the better you do. So when you throw information out to people, education days, statistics, the statistics are there. So it is known that it is occurring. So with extra training, this will justify the training that is needed for people on the floor.
Information, no, there you go. Have your backup information and be prepared for that, right? So that's great. Thank you. Okay, I've got 2 more quick questions there for you. Let's see. Okay. So what kind of language do you think you could negotiate at your local? And how would you get your bargaining committee to put it on the table to sell to its members as a priority? And I think we've already answered a lot of that. So take a minute, see if you can come up with anything that we haven't discussed with, and then I'll get you to report back at the microphones. So take a minute or 2 there. And I'm going to ask, did you come up with anything that we haven't already kind of discussed? Yes, okay, was someone coming to the mic? Mic 1.
I was bound and determined I wasn't going to speak to the mic one more time. But anyway, got to be me. We talked about security being such a big part of this annual, such a big part of everything that we're doing right now as nurses. And we haven't really talked about the risk to those people who are helping, not only the nurse who's at risk for her own security, but bystander risk is really heavy and high.
Good point, yeah.
I've been there and done that, trying to assist a member. And so I think if we tie it into the language of bargaining for security generally, I mean, it even affects, you know, we don't even have security in buildings where these guys or partners or whatever can come in and you know, attack. So I think that's the way to do it.
So bargain for safety as kind of an overall perspective.
Overall safety, security, and not just from patients or their family members, but also our partners, our intimate partners, or things that can go wrong.
And you know, I never even thought of that, because you could potentially have a patient who's a victim of domestic violence and their partner comes in.
Exactly.
Okay, that's very
and every
good.
time we help, we're taking a risk. And I think it even has to be in the training. I think that's a way to get, you know, trainers to the table to say to management, every time we help, whether it's a patient or ourselves, we take that risk.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else? I'm missing nobody. Okay, so mic 1.
We passed a resolution last year that our Josh member now sits on the executive.
Yep.
And we kind of thought maybe the alternate could be the DV expert.
Oh, okay, great. Yep. Or at least have like a place at the table. Yeah. Yep. Great. Good suggestion, because it is a health and safety issue, right? A couple of things that I had kind of overheard, and one of them I liked, was that we really don't need to sell this to our bargaining table. It's there, it's in front of our faces, and you won't need to really sell it to your bargaining teams to put this forward. You know, you have a lot of history in your union that would, and stats and all that information there that will help. And of course, we talked about the paid leave and the paid education for stewards. I'm just going to put this one up, and we can just kind of talk about it as a group. So this one says, how can you build support for your local in political action and the domestic violence at work? And we just kind of talked about that a little bit, was that we have stats, we have proof, we have history, so that the cell is very limited that we'll need. What kind of actions would you like to see your union take on? And what role can women activists and women's committees play? So I'm a little bit pressed for time there. So does anybody have a comment on those last two? What kind of actions would you like to see your union take on? And what role can women activists and women committees play? Participating in education is a huge part, right? So the first step is that your union actually put off this training, right, in this education day and made it a part of your education. So that's a really good step that your union did. I took your words. My partner tells me I have selective hearing, so I guess he's kind of right on that one. The lobbies are extremely important. Voting in the right people who put this as a priority when you have elections, that's extremely important. Presentations like this, education, advocating for paid leave, all that's very important, and it's things that I know your unions and the labor movement here in Nova Scotia is working on. So your closing exercise, and I want you to do this for yourself, and I'm going to ask you to check back in with yourself in the next month or two to see what you thought of this presentation. So on a little piece of paper somewhere, I want you to write one thing that you've learned. I want you to write one thing that you felt. And I want you to write down one thing that you'll do when you get home. And in our smaller groups, what we do is we put a stick figure, and we put a Post-it on the one thing you've learned up by your head, the one thing you felt by your heart, and the one thing that you're going to do when you get home is your feet, because that's your action. And that's the way this exercise in a smaller group would work. So it's one thing you've learned, one thing you felt, and one action that you're going to take. And I want you to check back in with yourself in the next month or so and see actually, keep yourself in check. Make sure that, this domestic violence presentation doesn't just kind of go to the wayside, that you put it to the forefront, because it's a very important issue. Go ahead, speaker on 5.
We had just, Alana from the IWK had the thought that your Buglum committees at the locals could place a memorandum of agreement for the contract just on the domestic violence current legislature and what's available. Just to kinda
Okay, I'm assuming all you know what that is, because I don't. Okay.
Thing in the contract currently on domestic violence, it's a way to get some information.
What was the committee you referenced?
It's a bargaining committee.
Oh, bargaining committees. Oh, okay. All right.
That's it for the acronyms.
Yes, we in the labor movement love our acronyms. So yes, and each province is different. So thank you for that. Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you very much.